welcome to GB Mag Chats. GB Mag Chats, where international students get answers.
Hello and welcome to GB Mag Chats, where we answer the real questions international students have about living and studying in the UK. I'm Sophia Mimwalter, your host, and today we have Sharvani and Cassidy joining us to talk about how to survive the British winter. Sharvani, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Sophie. I'm Sharvani and I'm an international student from Singapore. I'm currently in my second year of my undergraduate studies at the University of Cambridge, and I studied natural sciences at Cambridge. And we've just been going back to in-person teaching, which has been crazy for me because I started off with everything online, and yeah, it feels like a whole new world.
Wow, that must be so strange. And Cassidy, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Cassidy. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Derby, where I did writing and publishing, but I graduated mid-2020, so in the middle of the pandemic, which was just a completely new experience I don't think anyone was expecting. So the last year has been a bit wild, but I'm very happy with where I am now. So happy to be at GB Mag as one of their resident Brit students.
Sharvani, I'm going to come to you first. Do you have any anecdotes that spring to mind about maybe the first time you experienced the British winter and what was that like?
Yeah, so the first time I came to the UK was around the end of September, beginning of October. And bear in mind, I'm coming from tropical countries, so though most of y'all might consider that autumn, for me, that was already winter. So as soon as I landed here, it was quite cold for me. And I remember wanting to layer up because I kind of received advice from everyone to layer up. So I was like, let me give this a go. So I put on like a full sleeve top, and then I wanted to put a hoodie on top of that. But it seems like a really silly problem that I was facing, that every time I was trying to layer up with a new layer, the sleeves of my previous layer would keep rolling up. And I was trying to think, like, why is this so complicated? Like, am I the only one who's facing this issue? And obviously I kept it inside of me because it seems like such a strange thing to ask somebody for help. Like, how do I keep the sleeves down? And then after a few days, I finally realized that if you hold down the sleeve with your thumb and then put in the second layer, then it stays like fully unrolled. And to me, this was mind blowing because I'd never really layered up before, and especially wearing full sleeves in Singapore is just not really a thing. And it's just small things like this, I feel like, when you're coming from another country, especially if you haven't really experienced the cold before, it's these tiny tips and tricks that go a really long way. And things that might seem really intuitive for the locals just seem really new for someone who's coming from tropical country, which doesn't really have many seasons. So yeah, that's one anecdote I always tell everyone that always makes me laugh, like now, but at that time it was one of my daily most annoying struggles.
That's so funny that you say that, because I actually remember being really, really little, and obviously I grew up in the UK, and me and my sister, when we'd be tiny and my mum would be putting our coat on and she'd say, hold your sleeves. And it was literally a thing that was it was like, we learned that was, and if you don't do it, it's, as you say, your sleeves roll up and it's really uncomfortable. But so why would you know that? I mean, I love the idea of you suffering in silence, thinking, I can't ask anyone this.
I know. I feel like it's like a life lesson that you're taught.
Yeah.
One of the first life lessons you learn as a child is like you have to grab your sleeves and you have to like grab your socks and you're putting your feet into wellies and all of these like tiny little things that would, I don't know, just become second nature, don't they? It's mad to think.
Yeah. And I hadn't even thought about that until you said that. I was like, oh my God, yeah. I just do that every time on instinct. I love that. Cassidy, what about you? I mean, do you want to talk about your impression of a British winter, having lived with them your whole life?
I think lots of people say that British weather is some of the most fickle weather you'll ever experience within one country, which I completely agree with, and it's just crazy. And I feel like whenever I'm speaking to a non-Brit, it's always one of the biggest differences between myself and anyone from any other country. And it's just so bizarre that it's like such a, I know, a prevalent thing here. And the British winter, I think, is super interesting because we don't even have it that bad. Like if you compare it to other more northern countries, we really, really do not have an awful winter. But I always just remember, like, whenever snow rolls around, everyone's wrapped up in layers and everyone's like, oh no, we can't drive anywhere and we can't possibly like go to school or go to work because it's just such an unusual thing. And then I always compare it to, you know, more northern countries like Norway or in parts of Russia, and they deal with snow every single day and they don't really know a life without snow. And so I always just have to like reality check myself a little bit and just think it's not that bad, Cass. Like, come on, you can handle this. It's
That's so
just snow.
true. Like snow
Yeah.
snow days in England, other countries must just think we're pathetic. There's a
I
tiny bit of
totally
snow on the ground.
agree.
Well, everything's shut. All the schools close.
Yeah, literally.
We weren't complaining about it. As kids, a snow day was the best thing ever. But Sharvani, is the idea of a snow day, like everything shutting down, is that just crazy to you? Does that just seem really out there?
Yeah, I think this was towards the end of my first term where for the first time ever it snowed, I think that winter. And I've seen snow, I've been to places with snow, but I don't think I've seen snow fall that often. So I
Mm.
remember waking up early in the morning and seeing my entire window fogged up. And I remember seeing like little tiny like white droplets dropping out. And I was like a kid on the morning of Christmas. I was like, oh my God, is it snow? And I remember just rushing to the window and seeing the snow and thinking it looks so beautiful. And then I immediately called up my friend in college and I was like, do you want to go out and just like, just see it and like feel it? And by the time we put on all of our layers and went out, it already turned into rain. So it was basically just slush. And I think that just encapsulates the British winter. It's just snow and rain. And there's really like no pattern. It's just snow and rain. And it's just a very strange thing. But to me, it was still really, really nice. But I can understand why slush can be so annoying sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, the snow doesn't stay nice for very long, does it? You have a
Mhm.
day or two of beautiful snow and then it's sleet and slush for what feels like forever.
Yeah.
And the ice, the black ice, that's always one of my least favorite parts of winter. Is like, I just remember walking to school and taking such slow, careful steps because I was terrified I was going to fall over and embarrass myself. And I think everybody probably did. Like the speed, everyone just slowed down and was like, no one's got a rush today because we're not falling over, it's too embarrassing. So
Black ice, it's that thing, it's like one of those things when you're a child that no one really explains to you. They just make it sound really scary. So I was
Mhm.
convinced, I was like, oh, I'll die. If I slip on black ice, I will die.
Oh,
It became this really big thing of like, I was quite scared of winter for that reason. So Sharvani, it's interesting that you said about obviously you arrived in what we would count as autumn, but it was already winter. But I think there is that kind of feeling winter does start maybe even as early as September, sometimes October. That's partly because daylight savings time, our clocks change quite a bit in advance of real winter, and also because Christmas stuff is everywhere. Sometimes even summer's barely finished. Sometimes, so I definitely think there's an argument that winter starts in autumn anyway. But do you remember when you first had to do the clocks changing? Because obviously the days get so much shorter. I still struggle with that, and I've lived here forever. Do you remember your first experience of that?
Yeah, definitely. I took so long to understand what daylight savings means, and I still don't think I can explain it well. I've had all of my friends trying to explain to me, yeah, we turn the clocks and then basically you just get an extra hour of sleep. And I don't think that really encompasses the reason of why you change your clocks. I am beginning to understand it, but yeah, it was definitely a foreign concept to me. I remember as the days got shorter, it would just be kind of a running joke between my housemates and I that we'd go to have tea at like 3 p.m. And it was basically completely dark by the end of December. It was just pitch black outside. And after a while, we just begin joking like, is it really tea time or should we just have dinner now? Because it basically looks like it's late evening. But yeah, it's just crazy. I feel like it's one of those things that happen every year. And even the locals still are in shock every single year when it happens. Like, it's getting darker already. Wow, that's crazy. But yeah, it really is really crazy.
I love that you noticed that we, like residents of the UK, also talk about it every year because it's so true. Every year we're going to the office and be like, oh, the days are getting shorter.
yeah, like it's a shock. Like it doesn't happen literally every single year. We're
Always the
like,
same.
no way. Oh my goodness.
But I don't
Oh.
know about you, Cassidy. Like, as somebody who's obviously experienced it many times, it's still it gets to me in the same way every year, and that I think it does really affect people's moods. That lack of sunlight. I mean, obviously, again, compared to other countries, Finland and places, we have it
Mhm.
good. But it's such a drastic change from when the longest days we have in the summer, and especially going back to being a student in the British winter. I remember it feeling strange still being in class when it's dark. You almost feel like your body clock's like, well, I'm done now. Like I have to still do several hours more work But I don't know how you guys felt about that, whether, you know, productivity was affected. What do you reckon?
Yeah, so I always find it very strange how quickly it happens, because it's like one day you've still got a great, I don't know, 12 hours of sunlight or something ridiculous, and then suddenly it's like you've got 6. And like I know it's not that extreme, but in my head it feels that way. So it's just really bizarre that first day where you kind of notice that it's 7 p.m. and it's dark, and you're like, hang on a second. In my head it was still light till 10 p.m. like it is in the summer. So that transition is always like really shocking to me. And then what you said about lessons as well was really interesting, because in my first year of uni, I had lectures from 4 till 7 p.m, which is already quite a late lecture. I know, ridiculous. I remember on a Monday evening, and we'd all like, I think the buses might have stopped running by the end of it, so we were just like walking home. It was just an experience that made first year though, like it was okay because it's a good memory.
And Sharvani, if our body clocks took time to adapt to it, even though we've been here the whole time, I mean, how must you have found it?
I feel like even as an international student, I'm sure people have told me before I came to the UK that days do get shorter. But I think, as Cassidy said, it's just something you have to go through and kind of be in the shock and then get used to it, even if you're told, or even if you've experienced it year after year, it still hits you the same way. But yeah, I definitely think it did affect my productivity, especially since winter term was my first term in the UK. So I'm coming from like 24/7 sunshine in the tropical regions to like winter in the UK. So it was definitely a big change for me, especially because even when there is sunlight, sometimes there really isn't, because it's like a cloudy day, or like it's just dark the whole day and then it gets even darker. And I usually love my sunshine. I love natural light coming into my room, and it really makes me feel ready for the day. So yeah, I think it is definitely something that takes time to adjust to. But yeah, I think everyone does it, and everyone has low days in the winter. But you just kind of find your own coping mechanisms, and just your body definitely does adjust to the low levels of light.
I think that's really nice that you say, because I was going to say to you, did you have any sense of seasons changing in your home country? I'm sure lots of international students don't, and they haven't experienced that. And it is something that I think all Brits like to moan about some aspects of it, but actually, I love the sun. I'm definitely a sun, hot weather person, but I think I'd miss it if I didn't have. I think I like it because we look forward to it all year. Or likewise, I mean, personally, for me, winter could maybe be a bit shorter. But I think the actual changing of the seasons, I think I would really miss. Like, I spent one winter in a hot country and it was weird. I was like, oh, I miss it. I want to be cold.
Yeah,
So
well, I think, sorry, I was just going to say, I think a lot of what makes winter for Brits is Christmas, which obviously,
yes,
depending on which country you come from, may not apply at all. So I think when we think of winter, we automatically apply that to Christmas. So then having Christmas to be in a warm country, just is that Christmas still? Because it's those two ideas are so closely interlinked that,
absolutely.
you know, and until we've kind of really sat down and thought about it, I've never really put those two together, and thinking that cold and Christmas, I need those two elements together, otherwise things just feel wrong and I don't like it.
Yeah, it's very weird seeing like Santas in a hot country. But Sharvani, do you celebrate Christmas back at home? Like, what's your situation normally in December?
I mean, I'm from Singapore, so they definitely do decorate the streets and like everywhere around for Christmas. But personally, at home, it's not really a big thing we look forward to. It's just a public holiday for us.
Yeah.
But I think it's so interesting to see how cultures tie in with celebrations and like times of festivities. Like as Cassidy mentioned, it's so interesting that Christmas is in winter, because I feel like it gives some like people something to look forward to in a time that's perhaps not too great for other people to deal with. And similarly, back home, if I'm not wrong, I think during the monsoon season is in India is when most of the festivities are. So it's like, it's really wet and annoying outside, but there's always like the festivals to look forward to, and like meeting people and everything. So yeah, I think even though the types of festivals that I celebrate are different, they still revolve around the idea of having something to look forward to when the surroundings are perhaps not that great. So I think it's just such a nice idea to think about.
I love that. I'd never thought about it like that. It's like making the harder times easier.
Yeah.
Something to look forward to. That brings us on to, actually, I was thinking when thinking about this topic, winter, I suppose technically we count, I think, is December, January, February, really, although as we're saying, it's really autumn and winter. But winter and that idea of Christmas, I find December winter is great and cozy and exciting, but then you have Christmas, you have New Year, and then you're like, oh, I've still got 2 months of winter without Christmas. So I wonder, well, for both of you, what your impressions of that difference in the December kind of winter and the January kind of winter. I think they're quite separate things. Sharvani, don't know if you experienced that at all.
In fact, I went home for the Christmas break. So at the end of December, I was home. And because COVID got pretty bad in the UK, like this year, Feb, I actually didn't end up coming back for my second term. And I remember everyone telling me that you've escaped the worst part of winter by staying home in like Jan and Feb. So no, I actually haven't really experienced the Jan Feb winter. So I guess that's something to look forward to early next year.
you did the right thing. So, Cassidy, I don't know if you have any tips in that specific area of how to keep your spirits up, I guess, in the face of January blues.
Yes, I would personally say kind of find probably like your comfort shows and movies is what I always tend to do, and that's something that I really enjoy. Like after a day at work or a day at school, I would always come home, I'd probably put on Friends. Let's be honest, it's going to be Friends. And I'd light a couple of candles and I just sit there and I think, you know what, it may be dark and slightly miserable outside or cold or rainy, but I still can enjoy myself and do these maybe like the smaller comforts of life, but I can still enjoy them and they can still feel really nice and really comforting and like I'm actively doing something, because I think being able to say, no, I'm going home to watch a film almost tricks my mind into thinking like, no, I have plans and I have things to do, and I'm not necessarily being social, but I'm enjoying my time instead of just kind of sitting there and letting the winter just kind of roll by and not enjoying that. Although I have to say as well, I probably do spend a lot of the time like complaining, but that's just not important right now.
But you're right, you sort of allow yourself to, I suppose, relax a bit more and chill. And I think when the weather's nice, if you don't stay in and watch films because you feel like you're not doing anything, whereas actually in January that is an activity in itself.
Definitely.
There's nothing else to do anyway, so you may as well get cozy. And also I'm sure all of us are much more prepared for that in a post-pandemic world. I think we've all gotten pretty good at not having anything to do. So one thing we obviously talk about all the time as Brits, but we'll dive into a bit more, is the actual cold aspect of winter, which is not the nicest for some locals anyway, but I'm sure is a huge shock to the system if you've come from a hot country. Sharvani, do you have any tips but also anecdotes of your experience of just how cold the British winter can be?
Yeah, definitely. So Cambridge is quite a cycling town. So that basically means to get to any of my lectures, practical supervisions, I'm basically just cycling around the entire time. And I feel like in the winter that can get a bit tricky, because when I'm cycling, I start off cold and then I'm layered up and warm and cozy. And then when I'm actually cycling, I get really warmed up from the activity. So then I start feeling hot when I'm cycling. But then if I take off a layer, it gets too cold. So this is something I had to honestly just navigate and sometimes just bear with during winter, because it could get so annoying because I'd be sweating in my layers. But then after I got off my bike, obviously it gets cold again. So then I need my layers. So I think that's one of if you're into physical activity or honestly, if you're just out, I think that's why they say layering is so convenient, because you can just take off layers, put them back on, and just, store a few scarves and like thin cardigans or something in your backpack all the time. So I feel like layering did really help me, especially since I cycle around most of the time. And one thing I do regret though is that my coat that I usually use throughout winter does not really have a hood. And we all know UK just rains randomly without any kind of warning or pattern. So I wish that I did buy a jacket with a hood, or like a coat with a hood. And I know most coats are waterproof anyway, but I think having a hood just helps because then your head is dry as well. So that's something that I did wish I did. And I did get some nice warm woolly socks for the winter. I didn't really think socks would matter, but I did realize most of my socks were too thin for the winter, and just wearing like 2-3 at once just was not that practical. So I definitely say go for warm socks as well. But I think those are my top tips for winter.
I'd say they're very good ones.
Definitely.
And things like, because that brings us quite nicely onto the topic of winter, winter clothing, but presumably you've never had to buy things like a warm hat or scarf or gloves. Was that all completely new to you as well?
Yeah, so I ended up visiting a family friend the first few weeks I came to the UK, and I ended up asking her basically, what do I do for winter? Like, what do I buy? Like, what are the essentials that I need in my wardrobe? Because obviously, fashion wise, everything looks so nice in winter, but practically, like, I only have so much money I can spend on like winter clothing, and I want it to last, but then I also want it to be the ones that I use the most. So I think as a student, there's just more things you're looking at in terms of budget as well. So I think definitely reach out to the locals because they know which stores have the best deals, but also the good like quality of winter clothing and exactly which bits and pieces you need every single day that is worth investing in. So yeah, I think I really found it helpful to talk to her and just seek her advice on like which stores to go to because I didn't even know the names of stores like Primark and M&S. It's just everything is just new as an international student sometimes, so you don't know that like Primark has cheaper ones, whereas M&S is more quality but more expensive, and it's just these little things that I think the locals can really help with. And most of the time, they're really like helpful and willing to talk to you about it. So I think definitely reach out to people who know how to deal with British winter.
Speaking of Cassidy, as our resident local, do you agree with that? Do you have any extra tips? And also, yeah, the where to shop thing's a really good point. It's something we talk about in lots of other topics as well, in terms of like when you're first arriving, but for winter specifically, as you say, students don't have all this budget to buy a whole new winter wardrobe. So Cassidy, I don't know if you have any tips on that front.
Well, funny you should mention, we're actually going to do a real series about this with some videos about where to shop for good winter clothes. So we've been thinking about it a lot, but honestly, in my personal life, I think I end up, which is probably a lot to do with my mom, getting a lot of my winter clothing just from the supermarket because so many of the bigger supermarkets have really big clothing sections. And I feel like they're never too expensive. They're usually decently priced, but they are really great quality. And because they seem to be kind of quite popular stores, there seems to be one in most cities. So if it's ever a case of you need to return something, it's so much easier sometimes than buying something from maybe a smaller shop. It's there's more of them and they're not too expensive, so I always go there, and they've got everything like socks, hats, scarf, gloves, coats, and then I don't know, trousers if you want trousers instead of a skirt or something for work. Like they've got lots of options, which I always really appreciate. But my one horror story from uni when it was freezing cold, oh my goodness, I always think about this day. And whenever I feel cold, ever since this day, I'm just like, at least you're not as cold as you were on that cold day of third year, because it honestly, gives me the shivers just thinking about it.
So we spoke about this a bit earlier with the ways that we can make the miserable aspects of winter more positive. But I think that brings us on to quite nicely the best and worst bits, because I think it would be quite nice to discuss pros and cons, because we all know there's cons. So I just want to come to both of you and ask your worst bits first, but then we'll bring up the tone by saying what we can do to make them better. Sharvani, why don't you go first?
I think really my worst bit about the winter is cycling in the wind and the cold. It's just sometimes unbearable. By the time I reach my department, which is actually just a 15-minute bike ride on like the least windy days, it takes me up to 25 minutes sometimes in the winter days. And by the time I'm there, my fingers feel like they're going to fall off because they're just so cold and my toes are so cold. But then my body is too warm. It's just this really annoying mix of temperatures going on in different parts of my body. I did finally invest in some gloves, which really, really helped me, like especially cycling gloves, like those that don't get wet when it rains. So that really helped me. But I think still it's just so crazy how cold you get. And then when you're cold and your fingers are cold, you can't really do anything with them. So you can't use your phone, you can't turn doorknobs. Like it takes a while to thaw. And it's just like, it just feels so strange. But yeah, I think definitely cycling is the worst for me in terms of winter.
Thinking of gloves, and like you say, that I find that the worst when you can't use your hands because they're so cold, they're numb. Have you seen those? You can get gloves here where they have like their touchscreen, not touchscreen proof, but you can still use your phone with them on. That was like a game changer for me when I discovered those, because it's too hard to use your phone with cold hands. So I was like, this is genius.
Yeah.
Cassidy, what about you? What's your very worst bit of a British winter?
I think just, you just feel like wet and cold, and you've been like blown about in the wind, and you get home, you're just like, I don't know, you're just kind of all of the like elements of winter have just kind of somehow landed on your head. You're just like, I want to give up. Like, I'd never want to leave my house again. I think it's probably my least favorite part, just because it just makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, and I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to be wet, and I don't want to be like cold and unable to use my phone and everything. So I think that feeling of just being like, ugh, like not sticky. Sticky is not the right word, but like, ugh, I can just feel like the inside of my coat sticking to my arm as I'm talking about it, like the wet. Oh no, I hate that.
Yeah, just that being uncomfortable and cold is just, it's a different kind of cold. Yeah, I completely agree. It's interesting that we all said about the wind as well, because I feel like obviously the rain and everything gets a bad rep, but I'd take rain over wind in England any day.
Yeah, just not rainy or windy rain. Well, not rain and wind
rain
together, because that's just like too much. There's
That's
just too much.
to do. And Sharvani, what about your best bits of winter? What are the highlights for you of a British winter?
I think definitely Christmas and just all of the days that lead up to Christmas. Obviously, they do celebrate it back home in Singapore and like they decorate everything, but I think it's on a whole other level in this country. And especially because everyone's so excited for Christmas and everyone gets into the spirit like a month early, sometimes more. And there's all around you, there are like lights in the evenings, even though it's dark, like most of the shopping centers and the city centers are just getting ready for like Christmas. So there's always lights and it just feels warm, especially in the evenings, though it's dark and cold outside and everyone's getting ready for. I think the looking forward to Christmas is, in my opinion, way better than the actual Christmas day because it's just such a warm feeling that sustains for so long. And even if you don't celebrate it, so I'm not even that big of a Christmas celebrator. But it's just so nice being amidst everyone who's so excited for that day that you kind of just get into the festive spirit as well. So yeah, definitely Christmas.
That must be so exciting as well if it's so not a big thing, where any international students come from, wherever that may be, because it must just be like this crazy new experience of, it's like people are like big kids here. It's really, the magic is still alive. And saying about the run up as well, I completely agree with you that it's all about the run up to Christmas. But I was speaking to a friend who lives in a hot country, but they were saying, which I hadn't thought about, the turning on of Christmas lights, because in countries where their days are still long, or if they're hot countries, they're like, well, there's no point doing that because you'd have to go at like 10 p.m. for it to be dark. Or whereas actually that's really cozy because you could finish uni or finish work and go straight to like that. That's one of the things that's quite nice about having longer evenings, is that if you're doing stuff that's cozy and outside, same with fireworks night and things like that, actually then you quite enjoy the earlier darkness.
Yeah, definitely.
And Cassidy, what about you?
I mean, I completely agree with all the Christmas things. I think that is probably the highlight. And I think it almost works in the same way that hot weather and sunshine, I swear, makes the British population, the mood is just boosted, like something about the sun. I think Christmas does the same thing. So everybody just seems nicer. And, there's like less honking from the cars and less children screaming and everything just nicer and brighter. It's the Christmas spirit. But aside from Christmas and everything as well, I think like my fondest memories are always kind of like being with my friends and wrapped up warm. And I think almost those memories are probably more key memories for me, just because they seem to happen like fewer times than within the summer, because I think summer we go out a lot and we're always going for walks or going to the park or going for drinks or going out in the evening, whatever it is we're doing, and they'll kind of blend into one. Whereas in winter I always have very distinct memories of either sitting in the car out to Ulm with my friends, or maybe it's like an outdoor theatre or outdoor cinema or something, but like these things that seem to happen more rarely than everything else. And it's probably not true, but again, probably the Christmas spirit. And I'm just like, it's just nice that I think like I feel really grateful that you have those friends that you can still kind of escape the winter with almost, or like suffer together in a way. But yeah, and then even better when you get to combine Christmas and friends and do things together to celebrate and look forward to it together. So
that's so true, and I think that's especially prevalent when you're a student. And I have those same memories as well of just almost doing Christmas with your your student friends, your housemates. It's such a nice special thing, and I think it's a special thing of that era of your life. So it's nice to hear that sort of those happy memories last as well, don't they? And speaking of Christmas dinners, what about more generally any foods that you particularly enjoy eating, or food and drink, I should say? Because for me, one of the main highlights of a British winter is mulled wine or mulled cider, anything mulled, any hot drink. But do either of you have anything specifically, those things that you associate with that time of year, food or drink wise, and you really look forward to? Cassidy?
Oh, the first thing I thought of was advent calendar chocolate, which again is just a Christmas thing. But like at uni, and I think it was one of those moments where I was like, I'm an adult now, so I can actually do this and no one can tell me I shouldn't. But because, like you said, Sharvani, when you're like at uni, you don't really get to do much of actual kind of the run up to Christmas at uni, because you kind of leave halfway through the month. So my friend and I, we did the 25 days before advent calendar. So I think like mid-November we grabbed ourselves an advent calendar and counted down to like the 1st of December and then started again. So in theory we had 2 advent calendars, but we were like, well, no one can tell us not to do that. Like it's our money and it's our home. Which is like, I think probably one of the first moments I was like, this is freedom, this is adulthood, like this is what I was, I've been waiting for. So yeah, definitely advent calendar chocolate, just because it just reminds me of like independence. I love that.
Love that. But I'm impressed that you showed the restraint to still eat one a day. Real freedom would have been you eat them all in one go.
Honestly, I feel like we might have ended up doing that the last few days, because I think we like miscalculated. So in one day we had like 8 left and we were like, oh no, that's such a shame. How did we end up doing that? Crazy. Anyway, 8 chocolates in the morning. Love that for us.
That is brilliant. And what about you, Sharvani?
Oh, I'm such a tea person. Like, even every day I do have teas, but in winter it just amounts to like 2 to 3 times a day, maybe tea. I just love sipping my tea and just having hot foods in general just throughout the day. Yeah, I just love the warmth. But apart from hot foods, I really like spiced fruit cake, which I feel like is a very Christmassy thing, but I really love the taste of like spiced fruit cake with yeah, just like a dessert to any like fancy meal. I think it's just so nice, like pudding and cake with like everything else warm. It's just so lovely.
That's so true. I feel like flavors and smells and everything like that, I prefer the winter version of all of them. Like I much prefer a winter dinner than a summer one. So like I love a barbecue, it's fine, but I like a roast. I want a cozy roast on a cold afternoon. And smells, I'm a big scented candle fan, and I like Christmas scented candles all year round. they're just the best smells. Like nothing smells nicer than like cinnamon and apple.
Yeah, that's so true. Actually, I think my candle is actually like a Christmas scent, but I'm like, as soon as it hits kind of the colder days of September, my candle is lit and I'm like, yeah, it's Christmas now.
Yeah.
I allow myself to wear Christmas socks from the 1st of September because it's the one item of clothing that no one will see. So I'm like, the Christmas socks can go on. It's fine.
No, you build up to the Christmas jumpers.
Yeah, that's like December 1st, but socks can go on September 1st, I reckon.
I think so. Okay, so sadly we're coming to the end of today's episode now. We like to end each episode by wrapping up with our do's and don'ts for each topic. So what we're going to do is go around and we're going to say basically our takeaways from everything we've talked about, our biggest do's and don'ts by way of tips for our listeners. So Sharvani, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think my biggest do is talk to the locals and approach people with problems, even if you think they sound really, really silly. Trust me, it's so much better than just going through so many hard days yourself. Which kind of brings me to my don't, which is don't suffer in silence. Just reach out to whoever you can, especially if they've already experienced any sort of winter before, and your life is going to be 10 times more easier.
Brilliant. Cassidy, how about you?
I think my do would be to kind of find and enjoy those smaller comforts that you feel a bit more special in the winter. So whether that's being able to treat yourself with a film night or buying your favorite scented candle, those small things can, I think, really change your mood in the kind of more the darker days, the colder days, so definitely do that. And don't forget to check your heating in the winter and make sure it's working. Would be my big don't. If you're cold, just feel the radiator, just make sure it's still working. Yeah.
Brilliant. I think my do is sort of similar to that what you've just said, Cassidy, but is do use those darker and longer days as an excuse to socialize in a different way. So as we've all said, it's not necessarily, there might be some like less things you feel like you can do, but actually the things you can do might end up being some of those happier, closer bonding kind of memories, especially like we all said, getting people together for a Christmas dinner before the end of term. They're such special memories, I think, from being a student. So I think that's a huge takeaway for me. And my don't would probably be, it sounds silly, but don't, as Sharvani touched on, don't buy the wrong kind of coat or warm clothes. In terms of, I think it's actually quite easy to do. I think I still do it year in, year out. I'm like, I just need to buy one really, really good winter coat rather than going through jackets or all those things that might look nice or might feel right at the time, but actually a decent, thick, warm winter coat with a hood, as Sharvani said. It took me so many years to realize I just needed a coat with a hood because it will cover so many bases. So yeah, don't kind of go through all the other options before getting to that. And don't waste money on thin jackets for winter. Basically, you're always going to need a thicker coat than you think you are. Cool. Well, I think that brings us to the end. This has been really fun. Thank you so much to both Sharvani and Cassidy for coming and joining us today. And we'll be saying goodbye, but we'll be back with another episode. We've got loads more topics to roll through, and we hope we'll see you back here again. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
GB Mag Chats.